All right, let's dive right in. Today, we're going to put on our consultant hats and do a deep dive into one of the most powerful, most influential numbers in the entire economy, the Consumer Price Index. We're going to break it down, figure out what really makes it tick, and see what it actually means for all of us.
So let's start with the big, central question. You hear about it all the time, right? Inflation's up, prices are cooling down. But what does that even mean? How in the world can you boil down the price of literally everything into a single number? It sounds kind of impossible, but believe it or not, there's a method to the madness.
And that method is the Consumer Price Index, or CPI for short. This is it. This is the official yardstick the government, specifically the Bureau of Labor Statistics, uses to measure inflation. You can think of it as one single number trying its best to capture the average price change that we all feel in our wallets every single month.
Okay, so here's our game plan. We're going to tackle this like a proper consulting project using a MISI framework. That means we'll be mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive, making sure we cover all the critical angles. First, we'll define what the CPI is, then we'll deconstruct how it's made. We'll look at its two different versions, understand why it's so important, and finally, we'll get real about its blind spots. So, Section 1. What is the CPI? Honestly, the best way to think about it is like a thermometer for the entire economy. It's not just telling you if things are getting hotter or colder. Nope, it gives you a precise reading on exactly how fast prices are rising, that's inflation, or in some rare cases, how fast they're falling, which is deflation.
Now, here's the most important thing to get right off the bat. The CPI is not a simple average, it's a weighted average. And that means some things in our budget count for a whole lot more than others. Think about it. What you spend on housing every month is a much, much bigger piece of the pie than what you spend on, say, movie tickets. So housing gets a bigger weight. Oh, and one more thing. Don't mix up the CPI with the PPI, the Producer Price Index. The CPI is all about the prices we pay as consumers. The PPI tracks costs for the businesses making the stuff. They're related for sure, but they are two totally different beasts.
All right, now for the fun part. Let's pop the hood and take a look inside the machine room. You gotta see how this number is actually put together. It's not just some guess, it's this massive, incredibly detailed data operation.
And when I say massive, I mean it. Every single month, the folks at the Bureau of Labor Statistics go out and collect about 80,000 different price quotes. 80,000! This isn't just a quick online poll. It's a huge ongoing project to capture a real-time snapshot of prices in stores, at gas stations, and online, all across the United States.
So, what exactly is in this famous basket of goods they're pricing? Well, it's pretty much what you'd expect, stuff like groceries, gas, clothes, but it also includes rent prices from 50,000 different homes, fees from doctors' offices, and even things like sales taxes. But, what's not in the basket is just as important. It doesn't track investments like stocks and bonds or things like your income taxes. Why? Because the CPI is laser focused on one thing, what we spend our money on as consumers.
And this is where it gets really smart. The system knows that we, as shoppers, aren't robots. We don't just keep buying something if the price skyrockets. If the price of beef goes through the roof, what do? We buy more chicken. That's called the substitution effect, and the CPI actually accounts for that. It also adjusts for quality. So if your new phone costs more but it has a way better camera, the CPI tries to separate how much of that price hike is because of the new features versus how much is just pure inflation. It's pretty sophisticated stuff. So how do they turn 80,000 prices into that one magic number? Well, it's basically a two-step process. First, they calculate the index itself. They take the cost of the whole basket today and compare it to what it cost in a base year. So an index of 120 means prices are 20% higher than they used to be. Simple enough. Then, to get that inflation rate you always hear about on the news, they just calculate the percentage change in the index from 1 month or 1 year to the next. That's the number that really moves markets. Okay, next up. A lot of people don't realize this, but there isn't just one CPI. There are actually two main versions, the two faces of the CPI. And each one tells a slightly different story because it's looking at a different slice of the population. To really understand the data, you've got to know which one you're looking at. So on one hand, you've got the CPI-U. The U is for all urban consumers. This is the headliner, the one you hear about on TV. It's the number that financial markets and the Federal Reserve are totally obsessed with. Then you've got the C. This one is more of a workhorse. The government uses it for really practical stuff like making sure Social Security benefits keep up with the cost of living. And this chart just makes it crystal clear why the CPI-U gets all the attention. Look at that. It represents the spending habits of about 93% of the US population. We're talking professionals, retirees, the self-employed, basically anyone living in a city. The CPIW, on the other hand, is much narrower, covering only about 29% of people. So yeah, when you hear someone just say the CPI, it's a safe bet they're talking about the big one, CPIU. Okay, so we know what it is and how it's made. But the big question is, why should you actually care? Well, because this is not some abstract number for economists to debate. The CPI creates real ripple effects that touch your wallet, your job, and the entire economy. So let's look at those weights again. You can see that a huge chunk, about 80% of the index, is made up of what economists call core items. That's basically everything except for food and energy. Now, why do they strip those out? Because gas prices and food prices can be incredibly volatile. They jump all over the place because of things like bad weather or global politics. So by looking at core inflation, analysts can get a clearer picture of the underlying, more stable trend. And by the way, the biggest part of that core? Housing, by a long shot. So who's paying attention to this number? Just about everyone with money on the line. The Federal Reserve watches it like a hawk to decide whether to raise or lower interest rates. The government uses it for cost of living adjustments for things like Social Security. Your landlord might use it to justify a rent hike. Labor unions use it as a baseline in pay negotiations. And of course, the entire financial world hangs on every single release, trying to guess what the Fed is going to do next. And that really brings us to the bottom line. At its heart, the CPI is a direct measure of your purchasing power. I mean, think about it. If the CPI goes up by 3% over a year, you need a 3% raise just to break even, just to keep buying the same stuff. Anything less than that, and you've effectively taken a pay cut in real terms. It's not abstract at all. It's directly connected to the value of your paycheck. Okay, time for our final section. Let's put our consultant hats back on and do what every good consultant does, talk about the risks and limitations. The CPI is an incredibly powerful tool, no doubt, but it is not perfect. It has some pretty significant blind spots, and if you're going to use this data, you absolutely need to know what they are. So let's read the fine print. You'll generally hear three major critiques. First, there's a clear urban bias. Since both versions of the CPI focus on urban areas, they completely miss the economic reality for people living in rural America. Second, it's just an average. Your personal spending might look nothing like the average American's, so the national inflation number might feel totally wrong to you. And third, and this one is really important, is the experience skew. If you're on a tighter budget, a much bigger slice of your income goes to necessities like rent, food, and gas. So when the prices of those specific things shoot up, it hurts you a lot more than it hurts a higher income household. And that just highlights the broader issue, right? The CPI treats everyone as one big group. But in reality, soaring college tuition is a massive problem for younger people and their families, while the rising cost of elder care is a huge concern for a completely different demographic. The single national average just can't capture these wildly different experiences. So let's wrap it all up with this final thought. The CPI is an absolutely essential tool. It's the best we have for taking the temperature of the national economy, but we always have to remember that it is just that, a national average. So the real challenge, the thing I want you to take away from all this, is to think critically. How does that big national number really apply to your situation, your business, your wallet? So I'll just leave you with this question to chew on. The CPI measures one average for the nation. How would you go about measuring your own?